This is Jonathan Ferguson, the Keeper of Firearms and Artillery at the Royal Armouries Museum in the UK, which houses a collection of thousands of iconic weapons from throughout history. And on today's episode, Jonathan is taking another look at the guns of Valorant.
We've got this opening holographic sight, but when we go into aiming down the sight, as it were, we get what I think is an artificial zoom. It's moving the player's point of view forward rather than the sight acting as a telescopic magnified optic.
Make sure to check out the previous episode we did of the weapons of Valorant. There's a link to it in the description below, and while you're there, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out future episodes with Jonathan. And if there are any other games, guns, and mechanics that you guys want to see Jonathan break down, let us know in the comment section below. Right, let's take a look at more of the guns of Valorant.
Curse you, Dave, for your charms. We've got a little golden coffee pot, I think. Probably because he couldn't find a teapot. We are British after all. And this thing looks a heck of a lot like the Beretta PX4 Storm polymer framed 9mm pistol. It's not. It's different in, I haven't got one to compare annoyingly, but it's different in most details that I can recall, but it has to be inspired by that. For example, the disassembly levers are very Glock. The ones on the PX4 are different to that. The serrations are different, but there's definitely some reference there. And we have this consistent aesthetic of orange night sights. Well, however they're supposed to work, I don't know. I suppose it's a little interesting that we still have, well, let's see, I don't know. I haven't read up on this universe, which I should have done really. Oh, it's a reaction video, I'm entitled. In terms of what level of technology we're operating at, because hammer-fired pistols are still around, but the strong trend is away from those, and I can't help thinking that we will eventually lose the hammers because they are, well, at the very least, they're just as good, and I think many would argue striker-fired is better for various reasons. I won't get into that argument, just something that I noticed. I'm imagining this is going to work much like every other basic pistol in a video game. Let's have a look.
On the money.
Right, first thing I noticed is video game recoil. Quite old school, actually, in a way, in that it's coming straight back toward me and there's no muzzle rise. And thinking about it, probably all the guns in the game operate that way. If we were going for realism, then yeah, muzzle rise probably ought to be in there. We've also got an alternate fire mode, so this is not just your bog standard starting pistol from a video game. This does have another feature, and I don't really know how it's supposed to work, but it's a sort of slow 3-round burst. Real burst fire on pistols is inevitably extremely high because of the way they operate. And it's creating a sort of shotgun pattern on the target. So again, I'm not really sure how that would work. These are very small rounds. How do you contain that many pieces of shot in a tiny little pistol round? Answer is you don't, but the real answer is it's a game.
Your fault.
A submachine gun, of course. We've got to have a submachine gun in the game, more than one, I think. Bit of a UMP vibe from this, but not massively. Maybe the modern B&T submachine guns as well. We have one of those, but honestly, it's not close enough to make the comparison with. It's pretty generic. It's a cool design, but nothing directly based on anything I wouldn't have said. Probably the UMP is the closest, and nothing too exciting on the sci-fi front. I will say the recessed sight rail is quite a nice touch. That might actually impede how the thing would work, but we won't go there. We won't go any further into that. But what it does mean is you end up with sights that coincide or they're a good height for where your face is on the stock, and they line up with your iron sights, or potentially even co-witness with them, so that the point of aim of the front sight is the same as the dot of the holographic sight, would be the reason, I think, for doing this. And of course, what we see nowadays is the whole top of the gun is a rail. This has gone back in time, and I think that's probably UMP inspired, because if you look at a UMP, you'll see two mounting holes in the top of the receiver for an optic rail. Because the UMP came out when optical rails, full-length rails anyway, were not quite the thing yet, but it was more advanced than an MP5, where you had to clamp on a claw mount for your sight. So you mount a piece of rail or not. Somewhat predictably, although that's not really a criticism, we have a massive anti-materiel rifle. I'm only seeing the left side at the moment. It looks bolt action. It looks like various big AMRs like the Black Arrow, say. And to be fair, I don't have a scale yet, so I'm not sure if this is meant to be a true anti-materiel rifle or a large caliber sniper rifle, but it has got a break, big heavy fluted barrel, and it looks like it's massive. Oh, and the magazine is quite huge too. Quite a conventional looking scope again with turrets and rings, surprisingly conventional for a science fiction setting, because they've gone for a sort of integrated receiver look, similar to the original M98 B Barrett, where the stock is kind of not adjustable. Is what I'm driving at. It's kind of stuck where it is, and that is, I think, unlikely. Some sort of adjustable stock, I would imagine, is going to become standard on absolutely everything. It's already standard on infantry rifles, and we don't seem to have that. Now, we do have what looks like a big rubber butt pad as well, which also suggests that this thing is super powerful. Let's see. Now that I have a scale for this, it's more of a, I guess, a Magnum caliber sniper rifle, 338, something like that. I don't think it's meant to be 50 BMG or an anti-materiel rifle. That said, it looks like it's on the edge because of that break. This is the implied sort of sense of power. Yeah, this is much more. There's probably a line back from this to Counter-Strike. As the whole, the more I watch of the gameplay, the more I see this as a more sci-fi successor to the Counter-Strike series. I do feel duty-bound to say once again that I just don't think we'll have bolt-action sniper rifles, anti-materiel rifles, bolt-action anything in the future. Not for military, paramilitary type use. I'm sure there'll be situations in 50, 100 years where we're still using them, but for frontline service, I just don't see that there'll be an advantage. Modern machining and engineering is sophisticated enough that sniper rifles can be semi-automatic and are semi-automatic. There may be a sense of tradition there that keeps things going. Clearly at the moment there are still a lot of bolt-action sniper rifles, don't get me wrong, but yeah, I can't see that lasting forever. All right, I've not been paying attention to names thus far, but this is the Guardian, and real M14 vibes from this thing. I mean, even the flash hider is somewhat reminiscent, but the fact that it's got a gas tube under the barrel with that vertical gas block, even the stock is a little reminiscent of modernized M14 EBR type chassis stocks. The action is kind of, if you really squint, feels a little bit M14 as well, but then it's sort of incorporated some more modern ergonomics, but then so do the modern M14 chassis and stocks. We've still got a paddle magazine release like an M14. Let's see if my M14 impressions are borne out by the gameplay. Yep, so we have a sort of operating rod, fixed cocking handle, bolts arrangement, and the size, the scale, the heft of this thing definitely is in line with it being an M14 in space. I've said that before, I can't remember what about. But the M14 really is, I think it's fair to say, more iconic in popular culture now than it ever was in military history. I know some military people are going to start shouting at me for saying that. But in terms of its success as a standard issue frontline infantry rifle, it didn't quite get where it needed to get, but you know, all gamers know what an M14 is, and so we keep getting these echoes of it as the sort of big hefty brother to something like an AR or an AK, and here it is again. I noticed when the gun's canted over to the left, you can actually see the brass of the rounds underneath. I won't go off again on my Halo rant about why we're using brass-cased cartridges in the future. This more made me think about sealing mechanisms against dirt, that kind of thing. There are firearms where you can see bits of cartridge case through the action. It's quite rare because generally, if you can see it, dirt can get in and cause some sort of an issue. So I like the fact that you can see the rounds in the magazine sitting below the bolt. If this were a practical modern rifle, I think we would have this fully sealed when the bolt's shut against whatever it may be, sand, dirt, snow.
Healers down.
Now, something you'll see with this is we've got this opening holographic sight, but it's quite far down the barrel because it can't be where the bolt is. Admittedly, it could be further back than it is. But when we go into aiming down the sight, as it were, we get what I think is an artificial zoom. That it's moving the player's point of view forward rather than the sight acting as a telescopic magnified optic. It isn't. It's a standard for the game holographic sight. So I think that's sort of an artificial effect just for the sort of a comfortable view for the player. Odin seems like quite an appropriate name for this beast. Okay, what am I seeing here? Well, massive 4-chamber? Or no, or is it 2-chamber? Either way, massive muzzle brake, which gives me a sense of scale, I think, and that these are 50 BMG or equivalent. Very conventional looking rounds, quite conventional looking links as well while we're at it. But it's got a sort of saw grip at the back. It doesn't look very ergonomically comfortable. A massive great belt box underneath, a side grip as well. Yeah, this is probably the most sci-fi looking gun we've seen so far, but it does purport, I think, to operate on modern principles, i.e. gas operation, conventional ammunition. Let's check it out. All right, so we've got one feature of modern, like very contemporary belt-fed machine guns, which is a short top cover. Older belt-fed guns tended to have a very long, unwieldy top cover that gave you very little option for very secure mounting of optics. Although in this case, the optic rail is still on top of the top cover, but hey, it is on some modern machine guns as well. Anyway, a shorter top cover is easier to lock solidly into place. It's the current trend, I think, in belt-fed machine gun architecture, and we see it here. Albeit released by a somewhat remote-feeling button, so you press the button and it pops open. It doesn't quite seem to have that mechanical connection that I would expect on a conventional gun. The ergonomics of this side grip and that rear grip are not good. This very, very heavy, bulky gun is going to twist in your hand big time. If you're going to fire something like this unsupported, which of course we are, it's a non-realistic shooter, then a saw type chainsaw type grip over the top of the gun would make a bit more sense. Off to one side, I'm not really a fan of that. Wow, that's quite the rate of fire for something that appears to be on the order of 50 caliber. So fast that the rounds just seem to judder in place. They don't seem to actually move through the gun. And it seems like the rate of fire, in common with some other big old machine guns in games, goes up the longer you hold down the button, which I presume makes it harder to control. But I'm not really seeing any vertical spread that would go along with that. We've got a big tubular cocking handle on the right-hand side, reminiscent of the MG42, but also the smart gun, which the MG42 is built into, from Aliens, of course. Yeah, so that's increased rate of fire from holding down your firing button or trigger is represented by the barrel and the muzzle device, interestingly, heating up to a glowing orange, just as I guess a visual indicator, so maybe just for fun, probably. Needless to say, gun barrels can get glowing orange or red or even white hot, but it requires a lot of firing, more than a burst. Even at this very high rate, even with this very high pressure round, you're not going to get visibly glowing. And if you did, it wouldn't, well, yeah, it's a visual conceit. Detail there on the cocking. So we've got correctly for a belt-fed gun, pull the cocking handle back, return it forward. But in this case, you get a cocking sound in both directions, implying that this thing is closed bolt and you're riding the cocking handle forward. That's not why you do that on a belt-fed gun. You do that to cock it into the open position, and then you return the cocking handle forward so that it's not then flapping around under recoil. It latches forward and it's there ready to collect the bolt in the closed position when your gun is empty. That's why you do that. So this is aping what has been seen in either videos or actual range shooting, I don't know, of a real belt-fed gun, but it's gone in a sort of fantasy direction. That's not a criticism. I'm fascinated by details like that and second guessing where things come from. Okay, it is classic video game Magnum revolver time. We have a cylinder that's a little bit reminiscent of the Chiappa the Rhino that is, with its flat faceted design, but it also has a futuristic take on fluting, the grooves in the side, on each chamber essentially, or possibly adjacent to, can't quite see, yeah, between the rounds effectively. Now that would be there on a real gun to lighten the gun. That's really all it's there for, although it does have an aesthetic, definitely has an aesthetic aspect too, because you will find completely smooth, modern revolvers with completely smooth cylinders, or with flutes. And yes, if you go for the smooth look, you are adding a little bit of weight, but it's not hugely significant. We've got quite a science fiction look to this, but it's still grounded enough that it doesn't look like a Nerf Maverick or something. It looks like a swing out cylinder with a push button latch. It has a hammer, it's all pretty conventional. Let's have a look. All right, this appears to be what's often called an auto revolver, like the Mateba. Players having to cock it before use. Pressing the trigger is just dropping the hammer, it's not revolving the cylinder. And then on firing, the hammer is being blown back or returned to the rearward position somehow. And the cylinder is then being rotated, implying there's some kind of a gas system or a mechanical recoil operated system to do those two things, to advance the cylinder to the next round and to recock the hammer. The original auto revolver would be the Webley Fosbury, which actually had a reciprocating upper frame in order to do those two jobs. How this one works, I don't know, but what would appear to be a conventional swing out cylinder Magnum revolver is de facto some sort of automatic revolver. The advantage of that, in theory, would be a very light, accurate trigger pull. The disadvantage would be complexity, weight, cost, none of which you have to worry about in this game. It does look like we have fudged the reload here. When the empties are kicked out of the cylinder, they still have bullets on them. They're not empty cases. I think I'm right in saying that. Also, the ejector rod is literally an old-fashioned ejector rod by the look of it, that you would have to slap for the ejector star to kick out the empty cases. But this somehow does it itself, just with a flick of the wrist. The rod goes flying back and kicks out the empties. Shouldn't work like that unless it's somehow rigged to do that, and I don't know how it would be. But I also don't know how it operates. If you'd like to support the work that we do at the Armouries, we'd love you to come and visit one of our 3 sites if you can. We're in the UK, so that's a problem for some of you. Otherwise, check out our website, our various social media outlets, and of course, I will see you again next time.